Good afternoon. Welcome to the Glendale Water and Power Commission monthly meeting for Monday, March 4th, 2013. Could we start with roll call, please?
Commissioner Jemian?
Present.
President Armenian?
Present.
Commissioner Dentler?
Here.
Commissioner Yao?
Present.
Commissioner Chan?
Present.
Next agenda item, please.
2A, approval of the February 4th, 2013 meeting minutes.
Anyone have any comments? I reviewed it prior to the meeting. I didn't see anything on my end.
I move approval.
Okay. If there's no objection, then we'll consider those approved. Next agenda item, please.
3A, NERC-WEC compliance program update.
Mr. Abweg is racing to the podium to give you this report.
Safely racing.
Safely, always safely, yes, sir.
Good afternoon. Here to present to you the latest and greatest that we're dealing with WEC and NERC, in terms of the regulatory compliance we have to do for the electric system. There are only two things that we're concerned about right now. They released two new requirements or two new definitions in the area of the compliance, and one of them being, believe it or not, to this date, since the regulation came out, the fine line defining what a bulk electric system is, meaning if you're on this side of the electric system, you have to be registered in so many categories. They call that the bright line. It was always 100 kV, but there's a lot of industry that's trying to say it shouldn't be. It should be higher. So as recent as December 20, 2012, under FERC Order 773, they tried to redefine what a bulk electric system is. And what this means basically is that some of the registration for some entities like us, we may have to be looking at other registration, like a generator owner, operator, transmission owner, transmission operator. And so what we're doing is we're continuously assessing. We think we're okay. We're assessing it, and we're going to make changes if needed. But to give you a summary of what these changes are, the basic definition hasn't changed. But what they've done now is they added several categories that says that, however, if you're in this category, you may be included, and if you're in this category, you may be excluded. And the definitions are really still very vague, and so what we've done is we put together a task force we're analyzing whether or not we should be looking at the inclusions a lot more closer. But based on our interpretation at this time, we are still correct in our interpretation that we do not register as a GO or generator owner, although we have generations because we're not connected at the 100 kV side. Okay, so main thing here is, as simple as this is the point we're trying to make before with the reliability. It seems straightforward, but there's a lot of gray area that they're trying to clarify with new orders as they come up with. Yeah. And then the other definition that came out is when we test our relays, especially in the generation in our Resin power plant, is they're now saying that your protection system does not just include the relays, but every component of it has to be included and tested and reported. The good news is we've been doing this anyway because that's our definition, but in the other utilities are looking at it different. The one thing, though, that they have not included, which still baffles me, is they still have not included the circuit breaker as part of the protection system. In our mind, that should be included. Okay, so and those definitions were changed back effective, or will be effective April 1st. And as I stated, we're not too concerned about this because we're already doing this, but some of our counterparts in the industry are not doing what we're already doing. And so what does this mean to us? This is all a continuous process. We continuously track what the new rules that are coming out. We send comments, we participate in the election process as needed. We make the changes as we go. And our subject matter experts, the SMEs, are always looking at it, and through the guidance of Christine, we're able to, I think, we have a very good handle of what's going on. On top of this, by the way, just to show that we did do self-certification to all the standards recently. At the end of February, we had to complete one to say that we are in compliance with all the standards that have been issued. So that's it in a nutshell, is we're in compliance, we are not in any violation, and we are keeping track of the changes as they come up.
Any questions? So you don't foresee us falling out of compliance based on any of these new definitions?
No, I do not.
Okay. Any other questions?
In order to stay in compliance, is it going to require us to do many things in terms of maintenance, purchases? Is it going to impact our budget?
No.
In any way, shape, or form?
Not at this time. The only thing that would change it is if the inclusion, if they expand the inclusion, one of the gray areas is if you have 75 MVA or higher generation, which we do. But the definition, but you have to be connected at 100 kV and higher. If they change that and put that lower than 100 kV, then that goes through another definition for us, and that's what we're watching out for.
Okay. But let's say conceivably, if it does go the way that we don't really want it to go, what kind of a financial impact are we having to deal with? Have you looked into that yet?
It depends on whether or not we need to do upgrades to meet the compliance requirements in terms of what we need to test. Upgrading the power plant, as you know, is a major expense, and that's what we're trying to avoid.
Okay.
Because when you change one thing, you're not just changing, let's say, the breaker. You have to change all the instruments that go with it. We don't foresee that happening in the near future.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next agenda item, please.
3B, Chromium 6, update.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, after a long foray into the investigation and testing of chromium-6 removal from our water, Glendale actually started this as far back as 2001 and has become a leader in both the analysis and the removal process. We've completed, with the help of many people, the final report that's been submitted to the California Department of Public Health. So we wanted to bring Mr. Abweg and Ms. Lute here today to give you a presentation on what an overview. You've got the final report, I think, in your packet. We'll spare you going through page by page, but we have an overview with a PowerPoint presentation and then open it up to questions. So with that, I'll ask Ramon.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, so like Steve said, we've been working on the Chrome 6 for the past 10 years. Unfortunately, I've only been involved in the last 6 months. There's a lot involved with it. But on February 28th, the final report that we promised CDPH was issued, and that's why you got a copy, and that's why we're making the presentation today. With me, that's doing the presentation after the overview, is Dr. Nicole Blute. She has a PhD from MIT, just to give you her credits. And she's also a registered professional in engineering chemistry. She's been the project manager for this project, and she will give you some of the details. But what I can tell you is the objective of this report is mainly to provide the California Department of Public Health information regarding the technologies that's available for treating chromium-6 or removing chromium-6 and the costs associated in order to aid them in developing the limits for chromium-6. And so this report will be used for that purpose. And Glendale has been leading this research, as you know, for the past 10 years in trying to come up and define the technologies and the costs associated with it. But we can't take all the credit. There's been a lot of partners that have participated in this project. I pointed out earlier, I probably won't name them because I'm likely going to miss somebody or some entity, but in your packet is we try to acknowledge everyone that we know that have been associated with this project. So in addition to the funding partners that we have, which includes the state, the federal, and private and public organizations, I think it's worthwhile to point out that the Project Advisory Committee, who are the experts in the field, have been included, have been giving us some good guidelines in how the treatment process is, or it should be. So with that, let me ask Nicole, Ms. Blue, to come up, and she'll give you a more technical presentation.
Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be here, and I've really enjoyed working on this project for the past 10 years. So we'll talk a little bit about just a general overview of the project and what we found that came out of the research. And just to give a little bit of context, chromium occurrence is something that the state has been looking at in detail over the past 10 years. You can see a map here of that chromium is not a Glendale issue alone. It is an issue in a lot of communities in the state of California as well as across the country. And that's reflected in the California Department of Public Health intending to set a new regulatory limit for Chrome-6, expected out in July of 2013 this year. And the EPA is a couple of years behind that, but they're intending to move forward with that. And one of the first steps is to update this map to better understand occurrence throughout the country. So there were two major technologies that were tested in a lot of this research, but it first started from square one at the bench scale, where we we screened a whole range of technologies to see what might be useful before going out and constructing something that wasn't necessarily known to be effective. So we tested it at the bench scale and then selected down 7 technologies that we looked at pilot scale, or small, like 2 gallons a minute kind of a flow rate. And then based on that, we worked with a group of experts from different utilities and different parts of the industry to identify which technologies were most likely to be effective in chromium removal. And that narrowed it down to weak base anion exchange and reduction coagulation filtration. So I'll give just a brief overview of those two technologies. But basically, you can think about the two technologies as having a number of different components to each of them. And so you can see here in the square are the different components that go into the different technologies. For the weak base anion exchange resin, the system that was constructed and built to treat the water treats 425 gallons a minute, one well in the well field. It uses ion exchange resin, which you can see look like little granules of resin. Those are within the vessels, and you drop the pH of the water in order to make it really effective at pulling the chromium out of the water. It does treat this one well, GS3, in the city of LA, and it operates for about a year without having to replace a bed of resin. And so it's actually a very operationally friendly technology. And it does continue to operate. That does serve water to the city of Glendale in its current process. The other one is reduction coagulation filtration, or called RCF for short. This one was a facility that was built just for the testing phase. So it was 100 gallons a minute and pulled off of one of the high chromium wells in the north part of the city. The operations were a lot more intense, and that was part of the testing, was to figure out what those needs were in terms of operations, cost, and how low the technologies could get in terms of treatment. This facility was shut down after about 2 years of testing in 2012, and now it's just idle at the moment and could be dismantled depending. In terms of, one of the major components of the research was to identify a range of treatment technology costs so that we could better understand both the capital expenditures that would be necessary for treatment, as well as ongoing operations and maintenance costs. So this just puts it in perspective for different flow rates: 2,000 gallons a minute, 500 gallons a minute, 100 gallons a minute, with 500 GPM being a typical well flow rate for the city of Glendale. And it shows you in dollars per acre foot. And just to give a perspective, Metropolitan Water District imported water is $847 an acre foot currently for the city of Glendale. And so you can see that the technologies for chromium removal do fall within this range for the 500 GPM system. It's a little bit less expensive for the 2,000 gallon a minute. And then as you go to smaller and smaller flow rates, the costs get incrementally higher. And that's for both technologies, for the weak base and the RCF. And a lot more details are available in the report. So just in conclusion, Glendale really has been a nationwide leader in this research, looking into the removal of chromium-6 from drinking water, particularly in looking at technical feasibility as well as cost. So how low could we actually treat to? The research expenditures to date have been about $9 million, which has been funded almost entirely with external grant funding from different agencies and different participants in different cities as well. The final report, as Ramon mentioned, has been delivered to CDPH and is intended for their use to use it as a way of screening the technologies and what is effective, how low can they actually go, and most importantly, to do the costs in order to do a cost-benefit analysis for the state and take into consideration both cost and health benefits. Some minor work does remain, so there will be a supplemental report that will come out at the end of this year. There's one additional project that's underway right now, and that's looking at a couple of new resins and some things that have come to light since the original research began. This draft water quality standard, MCL, is expected in July of 2013. The state has indicated that that's when it will come out. The cost of treatment will be high. As you can see, the costs for even just removing this one contaminant could rival the total cost of imported water on a dollars per acre foot basis. If the MCL comes out low, then the costs will be incrementally higher. The Chrome-6 contamination in Glendale is mainly from industrial discharge, and so as part of that, the EPA is working to identify potentially responsible parties for this chromium contamination in particular. And then, like in the year 2000 case when the Superfund volatile organic compound VOC removal efforts, the city staff was able to get the responsible parties to fund this, and they'll move forward to do the same kind of cost recovery in this case as well.
I have a quick question about that. Oh, sorry, I didn't know we were at the end of your slide.
And that's it. Good timing.
Excuse me. Can I? Thank you. Thanks so much. Sure. Very interesting report. Thank you. 3 things I wanted to ask about. The map showing the places all around the country, the widespread occurrence, that was news to me, so I appreciate hearing that. I've often thought of this as a California-oriented problem. So obviously I had a lot to learn there, so thank you. Is there a difference between, when you say chromium occurrence is widespread, is that all Chrome-6, or are those other types of chromium?
Yeah, there's the two main forms are Chrome-6 and Chrome-3, Chrome-6 being the more toxic form of it. And in groundwaters, most of the chromium is as chromium-6. And I should have mentioned, it should be, can be present both naturally occurring in natural rocks and minerals, as well as from industrial contamination. In surface waters, so rivers and lakes, it tends, you can get a mixture of Chrome-3 and Chrome-6, so that does matter.
But as far as your slide, when you say occurrence is widespread, so some of these occurrences have natural origins.
Yes, they do.
Ah.
Yes.
Okay. So these aren't all potential sort of Superfund type sites that are attributable to human activity.
That's right. No, that is actually data that's for total chromium as well.
Okay. So in our region, Southern California region, there's so many. You have so many dots focused there. So in the Southern California area, are these chromium occurrences predominantly 6 or 3? Or mixture?
In Southern California, it's predominantly chromium-6 because it is mostly on groundwater sources.
Okay, that's what I thought. All right. So that would be occurrences attributable to human activity?
Not necessarily.
Oh.
When you get out to, the Palm Springs area, there's a lot of, like Coachella Valley Water District has a lot of natural wells that just have chromium completely naturally. There's no evidence of industrial impacts.
Okay.
So there are a number of those.
And then my other question concerns the responsible parties. So that would be slide 10, and this question is partly to remind myself and also partly for people who might be watching, because this has been a really, well, you've been working on it for 10 years, so you know what a high level of interest this problem received in Glendale. So I want to make sure the public understands as well as I understand. The 1, 2, 3, fourth bullet point says, on slide 10 says, the Superfund, the EPA is identifying potential responsible parties. How does that fit with the following bullet point where it says staff was able to get responsible parties to fund treatment costs? If the EPA hasn't identified them.
I will defer to Ramon.
Thank you, and I know you're the project manager and our scientist, so I didn't mean to.
What we meant by this slide is like in 2000 when we found that we have a high contamination level from the VOC due to the responsible parties. The same thing can happen here, that we might be able to tie the Chrome-6 source could be related, could be the same group. And if there's any nexus to that, we'd be able to get them to fund the continual treatment of chromium-6 from our groundwater.
I'm sorry, so I'm still not clear. When you say city staff able to get responsible parties to fund treatment costs, but how do you figure out who the responsible parties are if the EPA hasn't identified them? I'm missing something.
At that point, we haven't identified them. It was through the working with CDPH and EPA that they were able to identify who the responsible parties were. And we hope to do the same thing. Is what we're trying to say here. Once the EPA helps us identify who they are, we will pursue grant funding and also help them pay for the cleanup.
Oh, I see. So it's a little bit of a sentence problem. You mean on your last bullet point, you hope to be able to do the same again in the future?
Yes.
Not the city staff was able to get responsible parties to fund treatment costs.
For the VOC, you have two different
I remember that,
constituents.
right.
Yeah,
Okay.
so we were successful on the VOC. We hope to replicate that success with Chrome.
Thank you. Okay. Thanks so much. Those are my questions.
You say in the slide 9, where it's approximately $9 million, almost entirely funded with funds from many other agencies, including Glendale's management costs. Is there a breakdown? Like, how much is Glendale funding out of that $9 million?
If you look at Appendix A in your report, actually there's a table identified. The source of the costs were then, it's pointed out in the report. You don't have all the appendices because the appendices it's a lot. But it's pointed out there. It's about $8.7 million. What we meant by that is including management costs like...
I see. Your time.
Mainly the time that Peter Cabuna spent on it, Leighton Fong, and Don Froelich were all paid for. In the almost $9 million, we spent less than, or about $100,000 total of our own money to get this project going.
Other questions?
Yeah, I just have some questions. Well, thank you for the great presentation. It's very informative. But I was curious about the different levels of chromium-6. I mean, what is the minimum that can be detected?
Sure. The minimum detection level for Chrome-6 is 0.02 ppb, which is the public health goal for the state of California. And for total chromium, which is Chrome-3 plus Chrome-6, because Chrome-3 can't be measured directly, you have to measure total chromium, that is 0.2 ppb.
So are we just setting the limit, the MCL, at the detectable amount? Because there could be low amounts that can't be detected that could pose a health hazard, but we can't detect it. Wasn't that the case in the past where there's no technology that could be detecting whatever the limits that we're trying to set?
At this point, this research really demonstrated that we could not reliably get to the public health goal such that a standard could be set at that level. So it's not considered to be a technologically feasible level to set a standard at. And so California Department of Public Health, when they take the public health goal, then they also consider the costs and do a cost-benefit analysis for the state and come up with the MCL. So it won't be set necessarily at a public health goal.
Did this report or from your study made a recommendation on what to set the goal at?
No. This is simply an analysis. The California Department of Public Health will set that goal. And I think, as Nicole had mentioned, they're looking at July.
July.
So they'll use our research over the last 10 years and see what is hopefully a reasonable goal based on that cost analysis, and then they will set that. That's not for us to set.
Do we, as a city, differ than any potential, or can we set a goal or even be stringent, more stringent than the state goal if they come out this summer? Or are we bound by consistency where we have to be the same?
In normal circumstances, the two agencies that set these kind of environmental goals are the federal and the state. The state always has the ability to set a goal that's more restrictive than the federal government, but I've never heard of the city having the right to come in and set a public health goal that's different than what the state does. We can research that for you, but that sounds very unusual to me. I don't know if you have different experience.
Not at this level, but if you recall, when first the Chromium-6 came out, just to make sure that we're playing it safe, the standard set currently by the state is at 50. It's at 50. And the city council at the time when this became controversial because of the Aaron Brockovich movie and this thing surfaced, city council gave us direction that we shall be at 5 parts per billion, and we have been meeting that goal since. That's the only time I know about. Absent the current requirement by the state, we are currently at 5 parts per billion.
So at that level, that's the minimum detectable level, right? Because
No.
potentially, that's not the minimum?
No, that's just a level that was imposed, that the city council decided that absent a more stringent requirement, we're actually lower when the state is currently requiring as of this time.
So this time, the state is at 50 and the city of Glendale is at 5?
That's our own self-imposed as a result of there not being any standards. So once the Department of Public Health sets this standard in July, then we'll be able to see where we stand. It could be as low as 2.2, or it could be higher. We'll see. Maybe 5 is where they set it because of the great research that all of the parties have done on this, and Glendale's proven to be able to stay within that. But that'll be up to them. Once they make that decision, then we can see where they stand and look at what other options we may have.
But at 5, is that the health risk level? So that, are we safe at 5?
I'll let.
The public health goal is a 1 in a million cancer risk level, the 0.02 parts per billion. And so if you think about some other contaminants, for example, like arsenic has a very low public health goal as well, but then the standard is quite a bit higher because it takes into consideration the costs associated with putting in those technologies so that cities aren't bankrupt. And you can see an example on page 5 of the report, actually. This shows a good example of what the potential Chrome-6 MCLs, if you look at like a 1 ppb MCL, and say you had a 2,000 gallon per minute system, the cost could be in the $600 million range, for example. So you can see very quickly as you go to lower and lower concentrations for treatment goals, you wind up with much, much higher costs. So all those things are taken into consideration by the state when they set their limit.
So potentially we could get a final report this summer after the state makes the assessment where we can see where the city will end up. Great.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you.
So I'm interested in kind of the politics and the finances of this. As you know, we just went through, as a city, a process of restructuring our water rates and helping, as a commission, helping persuade our council and our community of the importance of restructuring our water rates, which ended up raising some people's water rates. So in July, when the new standard comes out, and looking at your slide that told us that some of the technologies could boost the cost of water to well over its present cost, correct? So the individual municipalities that are, that will be coping with the cost of technology following the announcement of the new standard are Glendale, a few other communities, and MWD as an entity is not particularly impacted. Is that correct, because of their water supply being from the rivers?
All the water agencies will be affected, and this would have a significant impact to the rate that every entity charges, it depending on the level. That's really why the study was created. At 0.02, it's nearly impossible for anyone, based on financial impact, to meet that goal.
Okay, so the impact would be would have to be collectivized somehow, right? So it's beyond the fact that Glendale has wells that are contaminated and Burbank has some. It'll have to have a statewide solution.
That's what we hope.
Yes.
But each water system, each water provider may be different depending on their source of water.
Something else to keep in mind is, as was presented, you have, if it's an industrial result of an industrial situation, you have the ability to go through the Superfund process, but as they indicated, some of it's naturally occurring. Those agencies that have naturally occurring chromes that have nobody to go back on other than their own agency and ultimately their ratepayers. So that's why it's really important, those bullets you saw that you were commenting on, is that we pursue that aggressively and make sure that we continue the great work that's been done, where we've paid very little and the responsible parties have picked up the bulk of that. But to keep going forward, we need to keep doing that.
Need to keep doing that, meaning the
Need to keep
federal,
getting the
Superfund
respondents
needs to keep
to pay.
looking for the responsible parties.
Yes.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much for the presentation.
Thanks a lot.
Next agenda item, please.
3C, Energy Risk Management Presentation.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, one of the items on my initial list when I became the general manager of things we wanted to take a look at was the energy risk management policy. This is what drives our energy trading function. And not, again, you may recall in my 90-day report I had indicated there was a lot of focus in this particular area, not that we had found anything wrong or anything that was something that was alarming. At the same time, it's an operation that's is a very large part of our budget, and we want to make sure that we're constantly, through due diligence, keeping tabs on this, making sure that we're adjusting where we need to, and that we're always managing our risk. Very important that we do that. So the risk management policy, which is the management tool that we use to set the course for our trading, was essentially reviewed and overhauled. And we took advantage of Eric Campbell, our finance administrator, and his past experience as a risk manager in other utilities to help us with this. So that was one of his initial assignments, and he's been working diligently on that, as has the entire staff. But I wanted Eric to come and give you, we're nearing the end of that process, so I wanted Eric to come and give you an overview of what we've done to this point.
Thank you, Steve. President Armenian, members of the Commission, my name is Eric Campbell. I'm the Finance Administrator for Glendale Water and Power. So like Steve Zern just said, we've produced to you today a copy of our risk management policy that we've been working on over the last 8-9 months. It's been a collaborative effort with the full team and members of the governance. There's a few key pieces I just want to call out quickly here this afternoon. One is we did a lot of clarifying roles and responsibilities. That's a large piece of this work. I mean, it's a dynamic market. People have come and gone within the utility, so it's just time to kind of freshen up some of these things. So the one area within the roles and responsibilities I'd like to highlight is we have an Energy Risk Management Committee. We clarified the composition of that committee, the voting and decision-making, the meeting requirements, which is nice. What we ended up with is the committee is comprised of 5 voting members. That would be the GWP General Manager, the Chief Assistant General Manager of Power Supply, City Manager Representative, the Director of Finance for the city, and myself, the GWP Finance Administrator. We're the 5 voting members of this committee. We also have 2 non-voting members, and that would be the city auditor or his or her designee, and the city attorney or his or her designee. So what you see there is just that group of people there. We're actively engaging the top leadership, not only in the utility but within the city, to guide the efforts around energy risk management activities. So that's a that's a good highlight that I just wanted to kind of point out. The key roles of that group is to provide policy compliance oversight, to approve what we're calling hedge strategies, as well as more detailed hedge plans. Next, I'd just like to touch on briefly is the concept of hedge strategies. That's a component of this policy. The hedge strategies are basically strategies, just like your business plan. It's a very high-level, longer-term statement or direction, and the great thing about that is it clarifies what your overall objectives and intents are. Real quickly, there's a range of possibilities in energy risk management that you could take. You could either be market cost taker or market maker on the other extreme. And what those 2 things basically mean, you could either be just taking market price, whatever the market price is, you buy and sell at that. Or on the other end, you try to be the low-cost provider. You're actively out in the market, moving in and out of positions to try to be the lowest cost. Somewhere in the middle of both ends of those spectrums would be something called a constant strategy approach, which is very common for municipal utilities and investor-owned utilities, where you're looking for some price certainty to help stabilize your rates. So we've been having a lot of good discussions about this. This policy mandates that there will be a written hedging strategy that gets updated and reviewed. And the nice thing about that, it goes a step further and requires actual documented hedging plans that will ensure that we are carrying out and actively managing to those overarching objectives. What all that kind of results in is just clarity of purpose and intent. It gives people some kind of cover for the actions they're doing, and it keeps the top folks within the utility and the city governance informed and understanding each step of the way what's going on in that dynamic market. So I've covered the hedging strategy, hedge plans. The hedge plans are the actual detailed shorter time period statements of activities that will lay out the expectations of certain goals that they're going to meet, price targets, volumes, more of a detailed action plan that we'll be carrying out. We also have done a good job, I think, of updating the list of authorized transactions that the folks that transact on behalf of the utility have the ability to enter into. We've also included a very important process for updating that list of authorized transactions. It's a dynamic market, so as new rules and products become available that would be worthy of consideration, they'll be presented by the Power Management Group to the Risk Committee, and we'll take some action as necessary as we understand those things and can figure out the fit within the hedge plans and hedge strategies that are developed. With that, that's really what I wanted just to kind of highlight. It's a big document. I'm sure that as you have a chance to go through it, you may have some questions over time. And with this policy directing the direction that we're headed, I think you'll probably see me up here on a more regular quarterly basis to provide you updates on the positions and the activities that the Risk Committee is working on.
Please.
Great. Thank you for the update. I just have a few questions regarding the audits and the frequency of audits. I know that Mr. Zun had previously mentioned that there would be internal audits as well to check to see if the policies are being followed. How often are you anticipating audits?
Well, there's a couple of elements. I want to make sure I'm using the term audit right. We have the city auditor that has open access anytime to dig into a particular topic, and what's nice is we're including them in the monthly meetings of the risk committee, so they're hearing all the issues and the decisions that are being made. But one of my key roles is to provide some reporting on policy compliance. So there's another form of audit, if you will. There's a lot of checks and balances that we've built into this. I hope that's responsive.
So how often does that happen for the city auditor to come
The city auditor, like I said, they have open access. They're attending all of our monthly meetings, and as they're aware of issues, they can develop.
But there's no formal schedule where it says every 2 months?
Maybe we have in there once a year they'll do an assessment. I know that I'll be coming forward with.
Eric will be doing his ongoing, almost daily review, but my intention is to have the city auditor look at it on an annual basis, with it being a more formal review every other year. So they'll do an abridged audit 1 year and then come back the next year with a more comprehensive audit. So essentially the auditor outside of the department will be looking at it annually.
Right, and then where do those audit reports go? Do they go to the city council, or whose eyes are those for?
Yeah, they go to the city council and to the city manager.
Okay, so those are the two stakeholders there.
And we could certainly bring those to you as part of Eric's regular update. At the point that we have those each year, we can bring those to you and share those with you as well.
I think that would be appropriate, Mr. Campbell.
I don't see a problem there at all.
And then just a couple more items. So, Mr. Campbell, you don't report to Mr. Zone, is that correct? You work in a different department?
That's correct. With the new structure of the utility, I actually report to the Director of Finance for the city.
Right, so we still maintain that separation, so it's great. So my last item is here on the hedging strategy. I know that we mentioned hedging and the process of hedging, but I've been requesting in the past, and also part of this plan should be looking at the effectiveness of different hedging strategy. I know that we either make money or we don't make money, and how do we compare that to the spot market and those types of situations? So
Okay.
can you elaborate on?
Yeah, sure. I'm glad you asked. There's actually two very distinct activities that the utility engages in. One is to hedge the cost of the power and fuel for the retail load. That's the main overarching objective of the activities. But then there's another almost side business, if you will. It's where they're attempting to monetize surplus assets. That's not the key business, but it's certainly one that brings value. And there are two distinct things that will be segregated as we discuss hedging plans and transacting activities.
Are there in a section in these reports to show the effectiveness of your hedging strategy? Are we making money? Are we not making money? And how often does that get updated?
Okay, it's a monthly basis, a monthly report that'll come out that will communicate the positions and the value of those positions that we're taking. The concept of doing a look-back analysis, so once the positions have rolled off, and hindsight, we all have 20/20 vision, absolutely we can produce a report. I think in this document we have the expectations now that I'll present on an annual basis, a recap of activities that we've done. And again, it's a key thing to call out that the objectives of your hedging plan for your retail activity is not to make money. It's more along the lines of having secure resources and minimize your delivery risk and manage your price risk.
Those are great risks too, but still we need to make sure that we are making a wise decision to save ratepayers' money.
Sure.
And betting and the hedging turns out to be bad, then we're losing money for the ratepayers.
You're right, and as we've had these we've had these discussions internally, it's been interesting for me to see as I engage the new people that I'm working with as I join the utility, just the understanding, realization of just how difficult these decisions are. So one of the goals of the hedging strategy and the hedge plans is to identify and document what's our definition of success.
Right. So do we have that, or are we still trying to find that out?
No.
Well, we're going to be, rest assured, we'll be a lot more conservative as long as I'm the general manager. And one of the things that we did initially was we did some adjusting to the hedging strategy where it went to, where we became a little bit more conservative. But these are all part of things that we're fleshing out with the revamping of the risk management policy. So once we have those in place, I would imagine as Eric comes back and gives his reports, we can roll those out to you and you can see them in a little bit more detail.
Yeah,
But some of these things aren't things that we've done in the past, so they're new. We're blazing a new trail in some of these cases.
I actually, I would have to go back to minutes, but I thought that we had this conversation before several meetings ago, and that the expectation was that we would get the reports. So I think I'd like to hear that we will get the reports, not
It's
that,
been-
you know, you kind of think we can. But I think the commission should see those reports. And we
Stentler,
do.
I didn't say I kind of think you should. I said as soon as we finish this particular document, Eric will then be coming to you with a regular update that includes all the reports, and we'll get them into the packet. So anything that we have that's related to this, we will include, including the auditors' reports as we get those each year. But we're trying to nail down the process. Keep in mind this is a pretty extensive revamping of what we're doing and things that were not done before. So
No, I
those are-
appreciate that you're in the process. I just think that the commission, since we only meet once a month, we should say what the expectations are of the commission, and I thought we had already covered that previously. So I think that it should just be expected that the commission gets the report whenever you do the report, that it should come to us. And what I heard the commissioner ask was, where's the report going to go? And the answer was, well, it will go to the finance department, and it will go to the general manager. And I think it should also come to us.
Okay.
So that should just be the expectation.
yeah, I'm
Yeah,
sorry, I
the
missed
intent-
that report. Yeah, that's the process. They'll initially come to me, and then we'll put them on the agenda for the next meeting or next update. For instance, if we make these financial updates on a quarterly basis, we'll send you the reports in between, and then verbally it'll be given in more extensive fashion at the meeting. When I spoke, I was referring to the city auditor's reports, which don't go automatically to the commission. They have and I'll bring those to you on my own.
That's not what I'm
Make
asking.
sure.
No, specifically, I was referring to even the quarter reports where it shows like the water report and where we are. I mean, how much we bought from MWD, where those things land. So can we get some quarterly updates on where we are, the hedging versus where the spot market was? And so the difference was, do we make money? Do we lose money on a quarterly basis?
Absolutely.
Look back. Yeah, so
That's my plan.
And I think before you got here, he had done a good job of making that
Asking
request.
that.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
if you're just playing catch-up, I understand, and you have a process, but I think we all agree with that we'd all like to see that.
And hopefully we're going to make it better.
yeah, that's part of the
particular
process
case.
is to
Yeah.
improve on it. But we need to know if we are doing in the best interest of ratepayers right out there. You know, if we're making money, great, but not.
My experience, based on what I've looked at in the past, is we didn't have this quarterly update to the commission about our investments and hedging and the results of this energy risk management policy, if any, if we made changes and that kind of thing. I intended to do that. That's what I wanted to do.
Great. Well, thank you, Mrs. Zone.
Any other questions? We do have a speaker card, but I can't tell, is this 3C or 3E? 3C, okay. So Mr. Herbert Milano.
Commission President Armenian, members of the Glendale Water and Power Commission, and staff. My name is Herbert Milano. I think that I have been coming to these meetings for a good deal, maybe 8 years, prior to most of you, joining the commission. I have seen the growth that some of you have, and the knowledge that some of you have acquired in this process, and I'm impressed that one thing that I see is that I see this commission finally taking the confidence necessary to hold management accountable and demand certain reports so that this information really is clear to you so that you can then convey it properly to the public. I have made several requests with regard to the energy trading transactions and the fund balances. I asked for the detailed transactions, and unfortunately, I'm not an expert, and I found them pretty difficult to read, to figure out what were the gains and losses. So I figured at an executive level, what kind of information would you need? And so I have some suggestions. The first suggestion is that you have these reports made to you, given to you every month, so that with the practice of getting this information every month, your level of knowledge increases and the level of confidence that you would have in evaluating increases. Second thing I'd suggest is that these reports should have a percentage of the operating expenses or gains, enter there as to what portion of the operating expenses was due to any type of losses having to do with energy trading. It should be there. You see, it's been hidden all of this time. During all the years that some of you have been here, this is the kind of information that you have not really received and evaluated. And I think that is a trend that I have seen, a very problematic trend that I've seen in many of the other commissions. You're given is generally a significantly thick packet of data. Oftentimes I sit through it and try to figure out what would I tell out of this information, and I can't. It is the role of management to synthesize the information in a manner that you can understand or the general public can understand. Giving you a stack of 3 inches of paper, I think, is intolerable and not acceptable. It should be presented in a concise way and in a relevant way, and I think that you should demand that the staff give you the information in that manner. I believe that the Energy Risk Management Committee needs an external public representation for it. And if we manage to keep a publicly elected city treasurer, it is my recommendation that the city treasurer become one of the members here to have a review. This idea of just having internal management reviewing themselves, I don't think is a proper process of giving you the type of control and the type of oversight that you need when these things are being discussed. So how do you determine, and Mr. Yao, you asked a really relevant question, how do you determine gain and loss? I think that question should be absolutely clear every month. But I have a suggestion. I would like to see a comparison of this utility to the other utilities in Southern California that belong to the Southern California Public Power Association. Compare it to the activities of Pasadena, Burbank, Los Angeles, and other cities, and say, how are we doing with regard to this energy management or any of these future transactions compared to them? Because it will give you a basis of comparison. And then the other question that is relevant to this is, how do you determine the past performance as a way of measuring whether you're making improvements? You need to have the information of what has transpired in the last 3 years, especially since Mr. Tiger came in to direct the Glendale Water and Power. You need to know. And I would suggest that you demand that you get all of the information concerning all of these energy trading activities, and if there were significant losses, that be absolutely clear what transpired. Now, with regard to the level of knowledge and capacity that somebody needs, this whole idea of how to hedge, what percentages to allocate to a particular type of risk assessment, all of them deal with game theory. And it is my suggestion that this commission look into the requirements necessary for a position of this level and what kind of mathematic knowledge is needed for someone to be effective manager for a hedge fund. I think that game theory is significant with regard to determining how much and for how long are you risking these things, and it might very well be outside of the scope of the current staff. Those are my observations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next agenda item, please.
3D, customer service update.
Good afternoon, President Armenian, members of the Commission. I'm Tammy Valier, Customer Services Administrator. This is our mid-year report, and I don't think you're going to find very many changes compared to last year. There's a few exceptions that stand out, and I'll point those out along the way. This slide is our customer contacts. Excluding our field work orders, the overall number of customer contacts remains unchanged. We're about 150,000 transactions at the end of December, and we were just about 300,000 last year. Most of our customers contact us by phone. However, 30% of our customer contacts are from customers coming into the office to make their payments. We do see slight increases each year in customers using the automated systems, the automated voice response system, and some of the automated service request systems. But a lot of customers just haven't moved to the other payment options that we offer. So that gives them a bad experience when they come into the office, and we have some long lines, in particular at the 1st and the 15th of the month. We are looking at maybe bringing on an authorized payment location or multiple payment locations. And if that happens, I'll bring that back to you and give you more information on that. Breaking out the types of telephone calls that we receive, customers most frequently call for general billing questions. How much is my bill? What's the due date? What's your address? Just very general questions. That's always been and has remained the same as our most frequent contact. It used to be followed by service requests, but in this last period, payment arrangements is actually bumped up to the second most requested inquiry, and I'll go over that a little later in the payment arrangement slide. Our front desk inquiries are exactly what they were last year. Public benefit programs is the highest inquiry, followed by service request, and then followed by just general billing inquiries. When it comes to how customers make their payments, we consistently see a slight increase each quarter in our electronic payments, 45%. That's 2% over last year, so it just keeps creeping up. And where we're seeing the decrease is in the traditional mailed payments. So the cashiering is 14%. It was 14% last year. So we're seeing no change there. But electronic payments we're doing very well in. The preferred electronic payment continues to be on the GWP website tool, eCare, although we did see a 1% move from eCare to home banking, and that may be because we did have some internet outages, so customers maybe weren't able to make their payment over at the web, and so they moved to their own home banking system. So as far as payment arrangements, you can see how consistent we have been for the last 4 years. We're always between 21 and 22,000 for our residential payment arrangements. So projecting this out, it appears that we have about 8% higher request. Normally we see the highest payment arrangements in the summer months when people get their hot bills, their high bills from the heat. We had a hot September, and so I think this is what's pushed it out. We had 23% more payment arrangements in November than we did the previous November, and 43% higher in December than the previous December. September had 27 days that were over 85 degrees compared to 16 days the prior year. So usage that would be billed for September and October would be in the October-November bill with due dates in November and December, and that's when they would have called us for payment arrangements. It doesn't exactly explain why so many more than the previous year, other than we did have those outages, and in November we had a very major system CIS upgrade, so those tools weren't available to the customers just to make a payment, and if they reached a call center representative, we oftentimes offered a payment extension because the system was down, and we'd say, we'll give you 2 extra days, the system should be back up. And so I'm assuming that that's what most of that is from. Our service levels were extremely poor. You can see the blue line, which is our goal of under 4% of our calls being abandoned. That is the standard. But you can see that for 3 months we tripled that number. And besides having a customer complaint, this is probably the worst thing you want to see in your customer service operations center. But this was an unusual situation. In August, at the end of August, we had our early retirement incentives, and we started to see employees take vacation prior to their retirement date. And then we had, in September, all of our early retirees were gone, and we were fortunate enough to assume 4 employees from other areas. But that took 6 to 8 weeks to train them, to get them up and running and able to answer telephone calls independently. And then in November, again, we had our system issues with our upgrade. But you can see we've recovered nicely. We're at 4.8%, and I looked at January earlier today, and we're down to 4.5. So I think we're going to be okay. But it was pretty rough 4 months there.
Just to be clear, abandoned calls means people giving up because they're on hold, right?
Correct. They've waited too long, and they disconnect before an agent has the opportunity to assist them.
And when what's the amount of time we're really talking about? The amount of time they're on hold?
You know, I have that
For example,
information, but I didn't look at that.
I'm curious about that, too. If we could get a general idea, your reports are always really helpful, and I know you've had some bumps and you give reasons for why, but I think it's helpful for us to know the amount of time. For instance, I recently had a neighbor send me an email complaining, that I was on hold with GWP for, an hour and a half or something, and I wrote back saying I'd like to know more about that, and I wasn't sure if it was accurate, and I don't know the person, but I realized looking at today's report that I don't actually know what you in the department regard as a reasonable amount of time to have somebody on hold, or if there is a rule of thumb that you try to go by with the employees.
Our goal is to answer phone calls within 30 seconds.
But then when people are put on hold, that's another time period that we
Yeah,
don't
so
have.
this is very unusual, and I do have the information. I can easily gather that for you. I just don't have it. I can tell you we lost over 5,000 calls during those 4 months.
But and I know that's a big number, and you're unhappy about it, and I understand that. But to me, if we're losing people, if people are abandoning calls after 45 seconds, that's less negative report than people are abandoning calls after they've waited 22 minutes. So
Sure.
give us a...
I can give that to you. I can put it in blocks of time. The phone system does
Sure.
that for us. So I'll
Thanks.
bring that back.
Would you be able to email all of us or those of us who are asking about this?
Sure,
So that
absolutely.
we could get that answer before the next meeting or the next time you make this report?
Sure.
Thanks a lot.
No problem.
And
Okay.
that's not a criticism, I'm just wondering.
Okay, no, that's fine. As far as the abandoned calls, I apologize. I left off the current year. So this is an annual comparison, so you can see where we've been historically. And the last time we were really not meeting our goals was back in 09-10. But if we were to be, we had the information on this chart, we're at 9.8% average for the year. So off the charts, actually. So on a good note, we continue to have a really low write-off to revenue. We seem to have recovered from 09-10 when our write-offs were over $600,000. Write-off to revenue is slightly lower than last year even, and we're much lower than the local average of 0.29%.
What do you attribute that to?
I think we have really good credit policies in place that we follow.
Okay.
And we send our accounts to collection agencies very early after they close. So the sooner we can get them to the agencies, the better they have to recoup them.
The 600,000 write-off, what year was that?
09-10.
09-10. Thank you.
About 33% of our customers are enrolled in eCare. Of those customers, we did see a 7.5% increase in the customers electing to receive their e-bill only, so we're very happy about that. I think that's pretty high for an increase over a 6-month period, and that's really a result of marketing's outreach that they did October through December in the eSource, the city newsletter. We did bill messages, and she put notes on the website encouraging customers to sign up for e-bill only. So it looks like it's been successful. Of course, we'd love to see that number go higher, but again, every little bit helps, and it's going in the right direction. That completes my report.
Is there anything else that, because I assume we want to move even higher on the e-bill area, or e-care, I should say.
Is there anything else?
Anything else that we should be looking at doing, in your opinion?
I think we just have to keep marketing it in all of our publications. We might want to try some type of campaign in the office, but again, the people who come to our office right now aren't really moving towards those payment options anywhere. They're people that are just really comfortable coming in the office. They pay cash. They sit down. They want to talk to a customer service rep. So other than our publications, I know when they do community events, they'll provide information as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we might want to consider, I don't know if there's a way to get the message back, Mr. Zern, to our marketing folks, because I think there's a lot to be saved there. If we can reduce the workload, in-person workload, then that gives this department more time to, work the other issues when phone calls come in, that sort of thing.
Absolutely, and I think Tammy's mention of the campaign is something we're going to look at and just have an all-out push and see what result we can get out of that.
I'm just curious about one thing. The e-bill only versus the hard copy only, it seems like both of them are trending upwards. Why is the hard copy customers going up as well as the e-bill customers?
Well, the e-care, when you sign on for e-care, sometimes you only want to look at your balance or look at your usage. You're not necessarily wanting to get your bill on a regular basis through e-care. So the hard bill copy is just, they don't want to change anything at all. They just want access to e-care. They may want to look at their water usage over the last 12 months or their electric usage over the last 12 months. So, and they just don't want e-bill. They don't want it, both. They just want hard copy like they're getting right now.
I would think that it would be an inverse relationship. With the increase in e-bill, you would have a decrease in hard copies. But it sounds like, and we have a saturated residential customer base, right? I mean, we're not getting an influx of new customers that all new customers require hard copies. So that's why it's a little confusing to me to see a trend.
What that's really showing is that we're having more customers, an increase in customers utilizing e-care in general. Because this is not our customer base. These are the ones that are actually signing on to e-care. Does that clarify?
Yeah, that does clarify a little bit because we have a lot more than 28,000 customers, and then of those customers, potentially you would see an inverse relationship of the total customer base. When the trend be as e-bill options go up, the hard copy should go down, right? For the total customer base.
If it was total customer base, yes. But we're just looking at e-care customers.
Okay.
I have a question. With e-care, are we accepting credit card payments?
We do.
And what kind?
MasterCard and Visa.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Over the telephone and over the web.
Just a comment on a question. I think regarding the e-care enrollments and the number of e-bills increasing, I think the possible reasoning is a lot of people that start getting their bills via email or do not request paper copy, they start missing it via email. So they sign back on and say, okay, let me get the paper copy as well, just so I don't miss it. I tend to forget. I think I've done it. So I think, from personal experience, I think that's what happens to a certain portion of the population. Quick question on payment arrangements. The chart, the last date period, 12 to 13, that's until, what's the exact month? I'm sure, I don't know if you mentioned that or not.
It's through December. So this is July 1st through December 31st.
December 31st of?
2012.
Okay, so it's not, okay, so it's.
This is a 6-month report.
Got it.
First half
so
of the year.
I just saw 12 to 13, so it's really 12 to December 12th.
Correct.
Okay, got it. All right. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for the report. We have a speaker, Mr. Herbert Milano.
Commission President Armenian, members of the GDLP Commission, and staff, my name is Herbert Milano. I'd like to start with the following observation, that I applaud anytime someone from the staff comes before you and tells you honestly, these are the problems that we've had, these are the failures that we experienced, this is our analysis, and this is what we want to do. I think this is a tradition from Mr. Abweg, who's been doing that for a long time. And I think that the understanding of that a failure is a process by which we learn is a cultural change that we need to expand as much as possible every opportunity we get, because it's the only way we can really assess how to improve. And I've been preaching more or less the same deal at the school district. Failure is not a bad thing if we use it to learn how we can improve. So I really applaud the honesty and the way it is presented, and I hope that it becomes, part of the embedded culture throughout all the commissions in the city. I would like to make the following observations on the payment arrangements, similar to the observation made just earlier concerning showing 6 months. It is my opinion that we should attempt to do an annualized report for that last column. That way you can have a proper year-to-year comparison, even though the annualized is an approximate number. It is used commonly in accounting, where you have only a partial year, then you annualize it to get a good comparison. With regard to the electronic billing, and as we begin to see more and more people taking advantage of the electronic billing, I always wondered, why is it that we tie in the rubbish onto the electrical? It was done before because it was a paper document and it saved the city money. But now that it is electronic, why don't we separate it out and understand? So if a person has a problem financially and they have a choice between paying the trash or paying the electricity, I figure that they would like to get that electricity bill paid first. And we tying it in unnecessarily to the rubbish. And this whole idea of tying other costs to a basic service like water and electricity, I think is unfair. I think that we should give people starting an option to basically disengage those two so we can get a sense of what the overall impact is. I would like to know how the new smart meter system is being used with regard to the idea, pardon me, I should have put this thing under, to the idea that of accessing the meters remotely when somebody doesn't pay and cutting off their electricity. I want to know if that's taking place. If we're using the smart meter system today and its capabilities to say that after someone gets his 48-hour notice and they don't pay, if we're doing it electronically much more quicker now. Because I believe, and it's my suspicion, that once you have a tool like that, you can impose a fairly draconian way of using the technology now, not for the original purpose, which was to reduce electricity use, and to facilitate a different way of getting informed. For example, I pay my bill electronically. I have a sense of basically what the amount should be. I would rather get a text message coming in and says, your bill was above your threshold. I don't need to know anything else because it's automatically paid. I only need to know the exception report. Oh, it was $100 over your threshold. So if my bill was normally $600 and I'm now get a bill for $650, I say, your threshold was exceeded by $50. Similar to the way American Express manages. I also like to make a suggestion for all of you to review the process by which you enter and access information on the web and compare it to the best practices in the industry. A few months ago, I made a suggestion that I believe that we should have our own user-defined login ID. Instead of having to go back to the old document, I don't know if that process was changed, but I've been asking for this for quite a few years now. But I'd like to see the commissioners experience yourself, going in there and ask yourselves whether the process by which we enroll individuals and access the information really fits good design. If anything that we have learned from Apple Computer and the iPad and all the other products is how crucially important that user interface becomes in bringing people in, giving information that is succinct, easy to use, and easy for them to interface with. Because if we do that, I believe that it will have a significant impact in the reduction of calls and basically the human interface that basically impacts the costs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think it is important to clarify one item, which is the remote turnoff issue that Mr. Milano raised. Could we get a clarification on that?
Sure, President Armenia, members of Commission. Yes, we are utilizing it every day. The majority of our disconnects are done remotely for both non-pay disconnect, for move-ins, move-outs. We're using the system in many ways for our daily operation.
And is there a policy in place in terms at what point you do the remote disconnect in terms of amount of time after non-payment, et cetera?
Well, it's the same exact policy we've always had. So they get the bill, there's a reminder notice. Around 8:38, they get a 48-hour notice, and when that expires, then they're eligible for disconnect. But there's no policy change. We don't do it any earlier or later. It's just when they're eligible.
Okay.
Can I clarify that? So before you would send somebody out there to disconnect.
Correct.
Now you just remotely disconnect. What about people who have special needs? How do you determine that? And is that the same policy where you just do remote disconnect?
Well, if they're on life support, for example, or medical equipment, then they would not get disconnected. We'd handle that differently.
But they will have had to have informed you.
Correct.
That they are in that sort of situation for you to know that.
Correct. But that hasn't changed with the new technology because we weren't required to make contact with somebody at the house before we disconnected the service when we were actually doing a field visit.
So in the past, you didn't send somebody out to disconnect, and they would try to make a final push for payment before they disconnect? That didn't happen either?
No. No. Are you saying try to collect the money at the
Yeah.
door? We don't collect money in the field. And most utilities have moved away from that.
And then the other point of clarification, which I know is on a future agenda item, which is the bill redesign, is that tied to also a website, specifically the billing website redesign, or no?
I don't know the answer to that.
We're going to take a look at that and see, if that's something that makes sense, and we can tie those two together, then we would do that. Yeah, the redesign is more an attempt to provide residents with more information about what it is their usage means, where their money's going, and that kind of thing. So to the extent that that's helpful for both our customers and our staff, absolutely we'll look at that.
Because I think Mr. Milano does bring up a valid point. When I pay online, I pay my bill online. The website itself is a very crisp website in terms of the information it provides. But when you log in and go to the billing and payment portion of it, it gets a little bit more clunky and looks like it's part of an older system. Mm-hmm. So I think it's worth taking a look at that as we look at the overall bill redesign as well.
We do have an upgrade that we're asking for with eCare because you're right, it's a very old system.
Yeah.
You may have noticed that one small upgrade that we did was when we moved to our new print vendor. We actually now have actual PDFs of prior bills. Mm-hmm. It was a little difficult to compare a paper bill to the electronic bill, but now they're exactly the same.
Right. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much for those clarifications.
Just two small comments. I've also used the online payment system, and I could tell you it was just from personal experience, it was tough or harder than expected to find how to pay. So my recommendation on that front would be always to highlight the things you want customers to do. I mean, probably most consumers that log on, they have top 2 or 3 reasons why they log on. Those 2 or 3 things should be right in front of them without even scrolling down. They should see those 2 or 3 things highlighted or bold or something. I mean, there are a lot of things that can be done in that front. Also, just one comment on the payment arrangements. That last bar, instead of annualizing it, what probably would have been best is if we had compared it to the previous same 6 months, because there probably is some sort of a seasonal trend here as well, where the summer months, you have a lot more people use electricity, so your payment arrangements, may be higher in those 6 months than your winter months, for example, or something like that. Instead of annualizing it, seeing the same trend for the previous years in those 6 months would give us a better idea if our arrangements actually have gone up or gone down.
Okay, I can do that. And I'm sorry, I think I've projected it out for you before, so I'm not really sure why I didn't do it this time, but I'll make sure I do that.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. Next agenda item.
3E, legislative update.
Good afternoon. It's so nice to see all of you. My name is Lana Haddad. I'm the Senior Administrative Analyst who handles governmental affairs for the utility. So it's been quite a while since I came here, so I thought I'd review and start actually by addressing a question that Commissioner Duntler had put to me about how we take positions on bills for the utility. So what I wanted to do is just quickly go over our little platform and how we come to those decisions and guidelines. The other thing I'd like to do is provide you with a nutshell summary of last legislative session, and then go over the Sacramento results for the election of 2012, and then give you a forecast. We were just deluged with bills on the 22nd, so I just want to give you a quick highlight summary of what's coming for us in the coming session. So first of all, our platform is based on some very concrete principles, the very general, though, from City Council. We have a number of stakeholders that play, first and foremost, of course, is City Council direction and previous, direction from the Council, but also some very general local governance principles. So, first of all, if the legislation would attack or usurp in some way local governance ability of the Council, it's an automatic oppose for the City Council, and therefore for the utility. If the bill would take away revenue or create costs for the city, that would also be an automatic oppose. And likewise, if something was going to bring money to Glendale, it would be very much likely that we would support legislation that way. For the utility, there's some other specific things that we look for. There's been a tendency in Sacramento to actually increasingly create very prescriptive mandates. So when we see the RPS, we see not just a standard goal of go out and procure 33% of your power from renewable sources. We want to see it in specific buckets, in specific procurement categories that have very stringent requirements moving forward to 2020. We'd like Sacramento to move away from that because we feel that it kind of does usurp local authority to make decisions that make sense for our local governments. The other thing is that we always want to provide within that is a mechanism of flexible compliance so that the utility has multiple ways of achieving the goal, again, that fit the local governing situation. So, for example, last session there was a bill on biomethane and grandfathering of contracts. For Glendale, that's not much of an issue. The biomethane that we have only comes from Shoal, so it wasn't a big issue, but at the same time it was for our sister utilities because they were finding that billions of dollars of procurement potentially were affected by not being allowed into a particular procurement category. So we want to be sure that we're protecting not only ours but the industry's ability to move forward and do that in a way that's cost effective for our ratepayers, while at the same time, and this is our third point, protecting all of our sort of three priorities, which are to meet our environmental mandates, and then to also safeguard our reliability and safety of the utility, and also to protect the affordability of our rates for our customers as much as possible. The summary of last session actually is interesting. We had actually 200 more bills introduced last session than we do this session. At the end of the session, we end up with about 10 of them that are on the table for both the water and the power side. We had a couple really great wins on energy and on water. Mr. Gatto, our assembly member here, carried a bill 1900 that would be the first step in allowing Shoal gas, for example, to be injected into the common carrier pipeline to take it over to Magnolia, where it could be burned potentially at a much better heat rate for efficiency purposes and also for other emissions issues. So that would actually be a great thing. So right now we have one of the governmental agencies looking into establishing maximum contaminant levels for certain emissions for this, and it's a study that's being done by CEC and the PUC at the same time. The other bill on the energy side was a bill that streamlines reporting for POUs. Mr. Bradford, the chair of the committee on the assembly side, carried a bill that would help us, that was written actually by trade groups to help streamline reporting and also streamline some of the different reports that are asked for by the CEC. On the water side, Mr. Gatto also helped us by requiring all new car washes that are built post-2014 to have a system that utilizes a minimum of 60% recycled water. So that will alleviate some of the burden, especially in an area like Glendale in Southern California, which is it's a desert, basically. So we want to preserve our potable water for its highest and best use.
That's recycled water provided by the utility, not their own
internal
recycling.
They can build systems into their
In other words, recycle their own water.
They can.
Okay. Or use recycled water from the utility.
If there's purple pipes already in place.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So moving on to the election, just to give you a sense of what an enormous change happened in Sacramento. It's the largest freshman class since 1966. 39 new legislators, 38 of them in the Assembly, one of them in the Senate. So now we've got actually also the Dems managed to secure a bicameral supermajority in both houses in Sacramento, and of course we have a Democratic governor. What's interesting about that is that it actually creates a little bit of a challenging proposition because they've already rolled out a very aggressive environmental goals, which sometimes have sort of harsh impacts in terms of ratepayers and the mandates that are passed through. So it's the utility is never opposed to environmental mandates. We're just concerned with at what cost are they going to come through for our ratepayers. So we want to just pay attention to that. In the Senate, we've got at this time 26 Democrats, 11 Republicans. We had 27, but on the 22nd of February, we had a surprise resignation from a moderate Democrat from the Central Valley. Mr. Rubio stepped down effective that day, so that opens up another position. 2 senators were elected from Sacramento to go to Congress to D.C., so we're looking at a special election. Primaries are actually going to be held on March 12th of this coming next week, actually, and then if necessary, if there's no challengers, then we'll be moving to a special election on May 14th. At least 2 sitting assembly members are going to be running for the LA City Council seats, which potentially opens up 2 more seats in the assembly for people who are going to be also running in that special election to move to the Senate from the assembly. So that election for LA City, I'm not sure how I put down June, but it's actually tomorrow. So it's March 5th. Moving forward just to the next legislative session, so we had almost 2,200 bills introduced. 800 of them came on Friday the 22nd, which was the deadline. So we've got about 89 of them that are purely on water, about 95 purely on energy. That actually does include bills that only apply to the IOUs and under PUC, but we're taking a look at them because oftentimes the POUs will look to do something similar as to what the IOUs do. Oftentimes it rolls downhill, so the RPS started with the IOUs and then became statewide policy. We've got additional 200 that are flagged in the industry just for things that are of relevance to public employees, retirements, et cetera. So of the issues that are really drawing a lot of attention in Sacramento, I just wanted to let you know that energy efficiency in disadvantaged communities is the hot topic. Out of the 95 bills for power, 10 of them are on energy efficiency in disadvantaged communities. So that's going to be a big topic of conversation. The other one that's a little bit of a surprise is fracking, although I guess now with Keystone it's becoming much more in the public conversation. So we're going to be looking at 3 bills on fracking. Metal theft, which was a great win for utilities and public works last session, is back again with an additional 2 bills there, or 3 bills, pardon me. RPS, surprisingly, is only 9 introduced bills this session, so we'll see how that's going to go. Some of those happen to do with cap and trade revenues as well on the AB 32 side. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. There's
On the energy efficiency that you just mentioned,
Yes.
Does that apply to IOUs only or everyone?
Some are both, some are IOUs only, and I'm not really sure. We have to look through them still. There's one, I think, that is, I'm not sure if it's an actual bill yet, but I know it's being discussed as an energy data center for IOUs. I know Sue Cately from the Assembly Utilities and Commerce Committee was sort of complaining that she didn't have one website to go to, for example, for energy efficiency programs. And so there's actually a bill to create that one website, and I think that's specifically for IOUs. But I think, we'll see as we move forward. I'll be bringing back more detailed reviews as we go through this. Figure out about 60% of these bills are spot bills, which means they're not really substantive at this point, but they're open to be, they have to be in print for 30 days before they can be amended in any sort of way. So we'll be coming back at least in the next couple of months with more bills and more changes.
Okay, yeah, I think it'd be important for us to get more frequent updates with you during this period, political period, just so we know what's going on with many of these bills. Commissioner Denley?
I have a few questions. Thank you so much. I appreciate that you remembered we were interested, so thank you for coming back. I wanted to ask a few definitional questions. On page 2, you describe for us how you arrive at the priorities, policies, and positions, and that guides you in deciding whether to support, oppose, or be neutral on any given legislative proposal. So I wanted to ask about bullet point number 1 under fundamental legislative principles. And again, just for my understanding of the process, no criticism. This is a really detailed report, so I wanted to ask for a little more detail, further detail. So bullet point number 1, it says the City Council adopted a legislative platform that provides general guidance to you as our legislative analyst. So where is that legislative platform? When do
Actually
they
online.
adopt it?
It was adopted, I believe, in 2007. It has not been updated since then, but it is online. I'll be happy to send a copy of that forward.
Okay, thanks. So the last time they adopted it was 2007, and you need to go and refer to that periodically to help you figure out if you should oppose or support a given legislator's bill?
At this point, it's the general principle, so and we know them so well, we don't actually go back to
I mean,
that.
you don't have to go back, but
Sure.
so they don't. It's not that they undergo a process annually and adopt a legislative platform.
You know what happened is about 2 years ago in D.C., there was an annual report that would go forward to the City Council, but because the earmarks were eliminated about 2 years ago in Congress, the need for that sort of dissipated. There was no money coming from D.C. to Glendale. So I think that's part of the reason why it hasn't been updated.
Okay. So then the other question is also on that same bullet point, jumping down a paragraph. When you say any bills or positions that may be considered controversial, and you have that in quotes, who defines controversial?
Well, I think the public defines controversial. So, for example, in a previous position when I worked with a different commission, family planning and reproductive rights would be considered controversial and not within the scope of City Council. So those things would not necessarily be brought forward.
But
Who would define that?
Right. When you decide whether to go and seek specific policy direction from our City Council, are you, and if you are, that's fine, I just want to know the process.
Sure.
Are you, as an individual employee, essentially kind of deciding what you think our City Council would regard as controversial?
You know, I think it's, for me, the way I would look at it, and I would run it past my general manager, obviously, or my AGM, but it would be something that is going against the grain of the industry. So if Glendale was going to take a position that was counter to 95% of the industry, or SCAPA, or one of our trade-wide organizations, that would merit review by City Council because we'd be going out on a limb in a way that would potentially open Glendale up for some criticism or attention that might not be necessary. So it would be something like that. So if we were going to go, say, I don't know, there was an RPS bill that was coming out and it was going to be 50%, and Glendale wanted to, I thought it would be a great idea for Glendale to support it. That I would not take a position on with my trade organization or in Sacramento until I would run that past my general manager.
Okay. So figuring out what is considered controversial would essentially comes down to you and your general manager and having a track record, a sense of what is or isn't kind of in keeping with your other trade organizations.
Sure. Precedent matters.
Oh, absolutely. I'm just trying to understand the process.
Yep.
So, okay. And then another process question is on page 4. I understand the first bullet point and I agree with it, the protecting the balance between environmental stewardship, liability, and affordability. I'm 100% on board with that. That's the challenge for our commission, for anyone involved in water power, of course. Where I might have a little, personal difference is on the second bullet point, protecting and maximizing mechanisms of flexible compliance, which is a mouthful. I noticed that on the third sentence you say, maximizing independence from regulatory agencies is a top goal. This is just my one commissioner's view. I just disagree with that. I don't think that a publicly owned utility should place so much primacy on maximizing independence from regulatory agencies whose creation, who exist because they are the creations of other political entities, and we're a publicly owned utility. So I don't expect you to answer back. That's just my personal statement. Sure. So with those, with that information guiding me about where you come up with the positions you take, and I understand, of course, you're also developing positions in keeping with the other utilities that you deal with. I understand that. By the way, just back up one more point of information. I was wondering, are you employed by multiple other entities, or are you solely employed by us?
I've been working for the city since 2004, so.
Okay. I've dealt with a lot of legislative analysts, and sometimes they have multiple,
Customers.
Customers, thank
Right.
you. But that's not you. Okay. All right. So with that in mind, I wanted to say, and again, not argumentatively, and you
Sure.
do not need to even provide any feedback unless you happen to feel like it. I want to just point out 3 places where I quibble with the positions that you took. And I'm hoping that City Council provided some direction, but I'm kind of suspecting that they didn't, since I know some of our City Council members, and I sometimes am surprised by the positions that are taken in Sacramento and in D.C., where sometimes the City Council finds out, and if I ask one of them privately, well, did you know our city took XYZ political position? And a lot of times they say, I had no idea. So I guess as a voter, I've been remiss in maybe not realizing that the City Council last adopted its legislative platform in 2007, so maybe I'm remiss there, and maybe our City Council needs to develop a legislative platform. This is a whole different world than we were in 2007 in terms of fiscal and politics and environmentalism. So with that as background, I'll just point out that I was very, very actively involved in the ENG bill, AB 685. I've been working on the California Right to Water bill personally and in conjunction with numerous entities and organizations. And that's one that was really near and dear to my heart. So I'm really personally disappointed that I didn't know that our utility was opposing something that I personally worked on. So I'm disappointed, and that will just be a lesson for me for the future to pay more attention to the positions. With all due respect, I know you have a hard job and have to pick and choose which bills to support and oppose. But for instance, had I known that you were lobbying against that in Sacramento, I would have loved to have had a dialogue with you and given you, my perspective on that bill. So just moving forward, because that's a particular interest of mine, and there may be other members on the commission who have interest in other bills and things that they also would have liked to have had a dialogue about. So just as an example, that's one that I completely disagree with your position on that. And then I was also interested because I'm not an energy person, as you know, really have had to work to come up to speed on the energy side and my understanding of how things work. But one bill I was following a little bit in the media was the Wolk bill, SB 594, on the net energy metering. Again, I wouldn't pretend to have any real expertise, but it was an interesting bill, and it got a fair amount of media attention, and I would sometimes hear about it on the radio, and it would, and my ears would perk up thinking, gosh, this is kind of an interesting subject. I'd like to know more about it. So again, just moving forward, I'm not sure why you opposed it, and it doesn't matter for today, but just a good example for me of if I have an interest in something, I'd like to have a little input, and it seems like the City Council doesn't have much input into the directions of some of the positions that you take. And again, no personal criticism intended. I really appreciate you illuminating for us how you do your job. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions? Yes.
Yeah, just follow up on that great suggestion, Commissioner Dan Lewis. When you oppose, support, or neutral, is there an explanation, or can you put an explanation in a column on why the city opposed certain bills or why they support certain bills? So that didn't come across in these type of matrix. So if you put that in, that'll be very helpful.
Okay.
And the other thing was, the reason why I asked last month for a legislative update was I got an email from, I guess, a contractor who was very interested in the feed-in tariff that is going to be due by July 1st of this year, that we have to put in place a feed-in tariff. But I was surprised that we didn't get that notice. Is there no way we can have also a schedule list of the bills that GWP have to meet, certain deadlines? I know that you have it here on the bill that we have to meet by July 1st, but is there a separate, maybe a report that shows that these are different things that GWP have to meet because of legislative mandates that'd be helpful too. Then we can keep on top of things.
Certainly.
Ask the right questions.
I think that's what I was doing before we had the changeover. I think I used to come every month and give you updates on the bills, and there's been a tremendous period of transition. So this was one of the reports that sort of fell off the radar for you. But I'll be coming back on a more regular basis, and you'll be getting legislative summaries, which do have a summary of what the bill will require and what impacts to GWP are included in each one of those legislative pieces. So you'll be seeing that on a more regular basis. I think you'll be better in touch with it.
Is there a formal process, as Commissioner Dentler suggested, to maybe integrate the GDP Commission into this process so that we can make some kind of motion or a suggestion to the City Council on how to proceed?
If I can respond to that, that would not be within, at least as the current ordinance is drafted, within your scope of authority. That would require an amendment to the scope of your duties to take care
But
of.
just, I mean, I thought our responsibility is to make suggestions or motions to the City Council for consideration. So wouldn't that be part of this process? I mean, we wouldn't necessarily make a position, but in terms of making a motion as a recommendation.
Well, looking at the Glendale Municipal Code 2.72.140, you're authorized to make recommendations to the city manager and the council of ways and means of financing changes and additions to the plant or the methods of operation of the Glendale Water and Power Department. I'm not certain that legislative advocacy falls within that.
Just to follow up with that, again, it's a learning process, so we are learning to do the best job we can do up here as commissioners. So I would like to follow up on that. If the principles that feed into the legislative positions are those set forward on page 2, fundamental legislative principles that are guiding the development of positions taken on pending legislation and regulations, you drop down to the principles are determined by multiple stakeholders, and our body, the commission, is listed as part of the process, and we're called, all through this document, we're called locally governed, local governance, the importance of the agency governing itself, and the staff doesn't govern the agency, the city governs the agency. So I just don't, we're here to serve as the City of Glendale's advisory body, and it's the City Council that structurally is to guide the positions taken on legislation and regulation. So why wouldn't we have an advisory role as to that?
I just don't see that in the current ordinance. You are here to advise the city with respect to the operations of Glendale Water and Power, but I don't view submitting a motion to the city council with regard to legislation as within that purview.
Well, I think you could make a case for either direction. I mean, certainly you're making the case for your direction, but I think you could sit here and say this bill impacts the operations of the of GWP, or will impact it if it passes, such as Ms. Haddad has outlined in some of these matrix. So in that case, I mean, you can make the case that this could impact the operations, and so, here's what our position should be, or our recommended position for the city to do on something like that. So what I'm saying is I don't think it's as clear cut as you're suggesting, and so. I mean, if what you're saying is true, then we shouldn't even have legislative updates.
Agree.
Why are we wasting our time?
That thought occurred to me as well.
Other than just to educate me. So I think there is what I'm saying is that I think that there's a back and forth here that's worth having. Certainly, the city doesn't take a position on an energy type of legislation without consulting. The city council wouldn't take a position without consulting GWP. I mean, that's the reason they would be taking a position is because they are in the utility business. So if we are the commission that oversees the utility, then and the reason we're having this sort of update is because we're looking at all these bills that, potentially impact the utility in this or that form. So I think
I would argue, with all due respect, I would argue that there are many reasons why we might present a legislative update to you besides just to allow you to take a position on it. I think it's important that you be informed about what affects our operations as a utility. But that said, you're right, it's not 100% clear-cut, and that's certainly something that we can go back and look at what that 2007 policy direction is and whether there is some role for you to play in that and what that might be.
Well, I think the role is already outlined here in the fundamental legislative principles, because it's saying in the principles are determined by multiple stakeholders, and it lists the commission. So if the commission has no role to play, then you wouldn't have the commission listed there. So again, it's not like I think this commission is going to go out and say, let's go through every bill and let's take a position on it. But I think on those things that the legislative analyst brings to our attention, to say these are potential things to worry about or things to pay attention to. If there's something that where our deeper dive into the issue could provide some guidance to the council, I mean, that's, I think, part of our advisor, that falls, in my opinion, within that advisory capacity. It's not binding the city to anything specific. At the end of the day, it's the council's decision, just like all matters are having to do with the utility or the council's decision.
Correct. Nothing's binding.
And the idea that, as you say on page 4, I thought it was rather eloquently drafted. On page 4, you say that the local governing body is best situated to determine specific strategies for the city in order to reach legislative or regulatory mandates and goals. Well, the local governing body is the city council, of which we are its advisory body. I mean, the staff isn't the local governing body. The council is. And how can the council adopt legislative positions to guide the lobbying effort without the input of the commission?
Well, I'm going strictly by what's in the Muni Code, and I guess I'm taking kind of a different interpretation perhaps than the Commission is. And what I could suggest is perhaps we could review this and come back to you with what precisely your role may be in this regard. Based on my reading, I don't read it quite as broadly, but maybe what we need to do is take a look specifically at not the summary of the 2007 policy, but the policy itself and see what role you might play in that. And I agree, you are here to advise the City Council. There's no question about that.
Keep in mind that this isn't specific language taken from some council-approved document. This is just a general overview from staff on different things. So to the extent that there's some language that specifically states how this works, my experience has always been, and I could be wrong, that that's the prerogative of the council and their direction to staff. So as Christine said, we will double check and we will knock on the city attorney's door and ask him his opinion as well, and we'll send something back to you all.
And if you can also add the city council, I mean, maybe take a poll to see if they're interested in having this commission be the advisory board to their positions. Maybe not just the city council or the staff, but if it's the intent of the city council is to have us be the advisory body on these legislative updates, then that's the positions that they might want to guide you guys to do. So it's not just, if it's murky, I mean, I think I agree with President Anion that the mandates in the ordinance doesn't really specify if or not that we should be doing this. I think it's up to the interpretation and the city council to decide.
Well, I don't think it's up to staff to go take a poll, though. I think if we as the commissioners are interested in finding out what City Council wants us to do and how City Council defines our role, we should go ask City Council. So we should think about that as a future step.
Yeah, I mean, my general approach is that I don't think you can just chop this off and say we're not going to, as a commission, we're going to pretend like the legislative environment doesn't exist and we're just going to stick to our little Glendale here. I mean, it's part of our job to look after the interests of the utility, and part of that is to look into these sorts of matters where mandates could come down on a state level that affect our utility. Obviously, we rely on staff to come to us to bring many of these things to our attention. But some of these things are not necessarily black and white issues. They could be gray areas that require or worthy of further discussion and dialogue, and then from there a recommendation. I don't foresee that that's something that's going to happen on every single bill. As Sadat pointed out, there's many bills, but I think there's some bills that have potentially more impact than others. Obviously, these things go through their normal filtering process to see which bill actually has any sort of real momentum behind it. Most bills don't go anywhere in Sacramento, but there will be occasions where one thing is coming to a point, kind of coming to a head, where I think it's worth the commission looking into and recommending a position. But I think at the end of the day, obviously, these things happen in more real time than our monthly meetings, so the more realistic interplay is between staff, and management of GWP and city council. It's going to happen in more real time.
And the industry groups, I think, as well.
Yeah. But I think it doesn't hurt to have another opinion if it all works out in terms of the timing and that sort of thing. Anyway.
And the more we understand about what you do, the more we can also be helpful to you. If we're kind of kept in the dark and only told after you've already taken a position and then the governor's already vetoed something, we also can't help the staff explain themselves to the community. And when we get emails or letters or people come up to us in our day-to-day rounds that we make in the community and want to know what does the commission do or think about topic XYZ, and sometimes they are controversial topics, I really think it's will help you do your job better if you would trust us with the information. You have really experienced professionals sitting up here. A lot of us probably have expertise that we could lend to you, and I know, of course, you listen to other trade associations, but we're part of the governance, the local governance of this utility, much more than outside trade organizations, and we should certainly be at least co-equal with their influence on your thinking. So I would encourage more of a dialogue and a building of trust and utilizing us for our respective areas of expertise, maybe as sounding boards, so that we can maybe build some support for some of your legislative goals. Because if we distrust or we think that we are excluded from the process of deciding your position, it's just not a good direction to go in.
I agree, and thank you so much for that offer. I was thinking, actually, when you were talking about the Eng bill, it would have been great to know that you were working on it, because we could have worked closely on either making the bill something that was more acceptable and garnered support from the water community in a different way.
Right. Well, I did talk about it twice when I was appointed here, and I passed out information about it. Of course, it was under different management. That's
water under the bridge.
Water
right?
under the bridge. Thank you. But there's a lot of expertise here. Multiple professionals with substantial expertise in a lot of the fields that touch on these different bills. So I think that we would like to be of service to our community, and that partly includes being of service to you.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate the offer.
Thank you very much for your report, and look forward to hearing from you regularly.
I do have one question.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lana, for the update. It has been a while.
It has been.
Yes, it has been a while. And I've been listening here from my fellow commissioners on the issue back and forth, and I agree it's a gray area. I see points on both sides, and I want to thank you in advance in researching, Christine and Mr. Zern. The question I have is for the Senate Bill 1332, the feed-in tariff. GWP must adopt a feed-in tariff no later than July 1st, 2013. Where are we with that?
Ms. Chan, that's part of our cost of service analysis that we are very nearly completing, that will be rolled in as part of the overall revenue enhancement program that will roll out later this spring. So once we have that cost of service analysis, which will include a number of new programs or programs that have evolved over time, such as EV and special charges for that, or public sector charges versus as a segregated body, and also feed and tariff will have something in there that addresses our consultant who is doing the cost of service analysis for us. We gave him that direction at the onset. So we should be complete with that pretty soon.
Mm-hmm. Now, so we're looking at generating a certain amount of energy, and we're offering to pay feed-in tariff. So this is not really something that can be done just overnight. Do we have a plan in place? Are we looking at solar? Are we looking at wind?
Solar is the primary, and
okay.
Steve, I don't know if Steve Lins has any more up-to-date information. So, looking at, that's the more likely scenario would be solar. That seems to be where most of that is going at this point.
Are we in negotiation?
Mr. President, members of the Commission, at this point, we are working with our cost of service analyst or rate consultant to help us figure out what we should pay for renewables in general, but we won't get involved in telling people what they should use towards that feed-in tariff.
Yes,
What we'll say is, if you would like to participate in the feed-in tariff with some sort of renewable, this is what we will pay you. We're still looking at those costs. We don't know what that cost will be, but once that is in place, then anybody who has any sort of renewable through the feed-in tariff can come in and take advantage of the tariff. It could be solar, it could be wind, it could be geothermal, which is unlikely in Glendale. But
So
and as Mr. Zern said, most likely solar, rooftop solar, or other solar.
We have had a couple inquiries about wind.
But we won't be prescribing, what type of energy they want to feed in through the tariff.
So we are definitely on track to meet this deadline.
Yes.
July 1st.
Yeah, that is in our cost of service announcement. Lana just whispered in my ear that there's been an extension on that, so why don't you?
We've actually gone to council. Sorry, this was a proposal that we already took to council. And
storage.
that was energy storage? Okay. Sorry, my fault.
We're on track.
Okay, all right.
Long and
That's what I
short.
want to know. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
So the commission won't, as it comes before council to adopt the feed-in tariff no later than July 1, 2013, or is that a council action that's required, or is that a staff-level action?
It's a council action that gets included as part of the new rate structure. So once that new rate structure is proposed, you'll see it. We'll bring it and show it to you and review it, get your recommendation prior to bringing it to the city council, who will ultimately approve it.
So that would have to be somewhere in our April, May, or June meeting.
It will probably likely be more like June, maybe even July. So that's
But it
when
says must adopt no later than July 1. Oh, I'm sorry, you said extension.
Well, we'll see. If we have to do the cost of service analysis ahead of the revenue enhancement program, we'll do that. But we'll have to. So you'll see it ahead of.
Tight turnaround.
We'd like to roll it all into the revenue enhancement package that we're getting ready to roll out. But if we have to, by law, approve it ahead of the actual revenue enhancement program, rate and bond proposals, we will do that, and we'll bring it to you and review it with you
Separately.
first before we take it to council. So that could very well be April or May, probably more likely.
That's a good example of something that this commission can advise the city council on. So if you do bring that to us earlier, we can make suggestions on what should or shouldn't be included in that feed-in tariff. That potentially be the final feed-in tariff that goes to the city council. So if we do get that opportunity to review it ahead of time, potentially we can make some suggestions of maybe the distribution cost is too low, that we can make sure add additional components to that, so that the final tariff is something that we would support. So that's just something an example of what this commission should be doing before it goes to council.
Right, and that's what our objective would be. And we will pass those comments that you have along to the council when we present it to them.
I had one last thought before you sit down. I know we've kept you up here a really long time and it's getting late. I suspect everyone, or virtually everyone up on this dais, has had lobbying experience, legislative drafting. So even on matters that aren't maybe under our immediate purview as a commission, I'd like to suggest that that you could also be more effective in representing the utility in Sacramento and elsewhere if there's ever an occasion to call on any of us to assist. I think that I would encourage you to do that. I know people who have been up here before I got here had legislative lobbying experience, and I know we've got some very powerful commissioners here. Also, all of our various boards and commissions in Glendale, a lot of people have personal relationships with with various legislators, and we could have a more proactive legislative program than everything falling on your shoulders. I don't know if you have lobby day with your trade associations, but I suspect you do. And I think that it's something to consider, to tap into the expertise that you have on this commission and the contacts.
Okay, thank you very much. We do have a speaker, Mr. Herbert Milano. I would like to limit public speakers to 3 minutes moving forward because we already passed our commission time.
Sorry.
Thank you very much. Commission President Arminian, Commissioners, and staff, my name is Herbert Milano. Ms. Dentler, I want to say that I commend you for your comments with regard to reaffirming the role of the Commission as the body that is accountable or holding staff accountable to certain levels of performance. You are our voice for the public, and I take a much more stringent, if not cynical, view of what has transpired in the city's commission system for a long time. When information is withheld from the commissioners, the staff is withholding information from the public at large. When decisions are made where they come and tell you that it is not your purview, and you experience the parsing of the words of the ordinance to basically prevent discussion, we have a problem. And I can tell you this from the hundreds of presentations that I made at other commissions where the same attitude exists. I found it with the Audit Commission, with the Audit Committee, dealing with accounting issues, and even though I was the only person present, no one else showed up from the city. And yet the city attorney's representative is there to cut me off, even though I would only have like 3 minutes to speak on an item. I think that this process of reasserting your authority, representing our interests, is very significant. And if there are areas of significance that you find that is not covered in the ordinance, that you take the proactive action to bring it in and bring it into your purview of things that need to be addressed. This legislative items includes a couple of things that are incredibly important. I see AB 685 having to do with the definition of affordability. It's a huge issue, and it pertains to a significant number of families who really cannot afford the utility for water. I know that because I've talked to them during my campaign. These are incredibly relevant, but for a reinterpretation to say that this conflicts with Prop 218, and all of a sudden we have the staff concerned about 218 when they didn't care diddly about 218 for years, is a significant issue. We depend on you and your expertise to reassert the power vested in you, whatever power you have with regard to recommending, because I know that the City Council cannot possibly have the time to oversee and read over these things that are in your area of experience. So I'm leaving today with a significant amount of optimism, and Ms. Dentler, I really applaud you for reaffirming the role that you have in overseeing this utility properly. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before we move on to the next agenda item, I had one question, because in reviewing the minutes, there was an agenda item that was requested that kind of falls into this category, which I think you were going to check on. Did I miss something? Did we talk about that already?
Which item is that now?
If you look at agenda forecast, we had talked about, Commissioner Yan asked Ms. Godinez whether the commission may agendize a presentation regarding Measure B.
The council email.
Right, and you would have received an email from the city attorney on that, 2 emails, I believe. One was a memo and one was a direct email to this commission explaining that that's not within your purview to consider.
Okay.
Because you can't, as a commission, take a stand for or against an item, and that's why that doesn't appear on your agenda today.
Yeah, I probably went to GWP email, Glendale email.
But that's consistent with city council members too? They can't take position on those measures as well? Individually or as a body?
Members of boards and commissions cannot. I mean, the council has put the measures on the ballot, so they took that position, certainly.
And we did make a presentation on that, actually.
In January.
Ms. Godinez made a presentation with Mr. Elliott.
So we could make a factual presentation, which is what we did in January, but we couldn't have the pros and cons of a measure.
Okay, and I think that's what you were
Yeah, that was
requesting.
what we were looking for. It was.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Next agenda item.
4, oral communications.
Okay, we have two speakers. Mr. Zavos, again, 3 minutes each.
My name's Harry Zavos. You mentioned Measure B. It'll be on the ballot. It's ostensibly presented as making no substantive changes. But if you look at sections in Article 11 of the city charter, it tells a different story. Section 20 creates the GWP surplus fund. And the first paragraph of that section and the last paragraph of Section 20 make it unambiguously clear that the only monies that go into that fund are surplus monies, monies left over after all the utilities needs have been first met. That Section 22 also indicates how those monies go out of the GWP surplus fund. And they expressly say they can only be used for the electrical works or the water works with one exception. It provides of the money that's in that surplus fund, and remember that's money left over after all the utilities needs have been met, an amount equal to 25% of the operating revenues of the utility can be transferred from that surplus fund to the general reserve fund. That general reserve fund is defined in Section 15. And it's a revolving fund of credit that exists for the purpose of advancing monies to other funds to put them on a cash basis temporarily. And with one exception, the charter requires those monies to be returned back to that general reserve fund. What's the city's practice? The city isn't transferring surplus monies from GWP. God knows we don't have any surplus. We read in the paper about the precarious financial condition of the utility. And it's not transferring those funds to the general reserve fund as required by Section 20 of Article 11. And incidentally, that is the only transfer language that appears in the charter, and it expressly says the monies come from the surplus fund to the general reserve fund. That's the only section that authorizes transfers of GWP monies for use for other than GWP needs. That reserve fund, as I said, exists to extend cash to other funds, to put them on a cash basis, and with one exception, those monies have to be returned. Now here's the practice of the city. It's not transferring surplus GWP monies, and it's not transferring it to the general reserve fund. Instead, it's transferring to the general budget fund that pays for general budget appropriations, pays for parks, libraries, etc. And the city is doing that even though Section 14 that establishes a general budget fund expressly excludes GWP monies from going there. What does Measure B do?
Finish your sentence.
That Measure B essentially comports the charter with the current practice by doing away with the general reserve fund, doing away with the general surplus fund, authorizing monies, regardless of surplus, to be transferred to the fund that pays for general appropriations. That's not an accounting change. It's not a cleanup. It's a substantive change.
Thank you. Next speaker, Mr. Milano.
Well, am I starting already? I was waiting for the clock to start once you get the documents. Could I have the clock restarted so I can get 3 minutes?
Go ahead.
Mr. Armenian, members of the Commission, my name is Herbert Milano. I have given to you a summary document of the city's finances in a way that I think is much clearer than basically reading the complex financial statements. This particular example that I gave to you gives the total liabilities per household. You take all the liabilities of the city and say, for household, this is your share. Now, I basically went to the CAFR to get the information. I then tried to do something similar for the Glendale Water and Power, but I could not find the Glendale Water and Power financials for year ending June 30th, 2012. Not anywhere that I went through. I made a request to the city manager. I believe I may have copied Mr. Zern as well. Where is it? I cannot locate it. And then I think this is part of the idea that you create accessibility to information, one, and second, you make the information clear and succinct to you and the public. I keep repeating that, and I've been doing that for years. I would like to suggest that the staff give to you every month a summary of the financial operations, and then compare that to the previous year and the previous year so you can get a trend line. Not something overly complex, something very top level that would allow you in a very quick way to assess the trends and allows for the public to get access to that information. Because once we see it, at least I will take the time to dig into that data and basically drill down and maybe bring up something to your attention. I would also like to make a request that the bill redesign, I've been trying to participate in this, but the staff never calls me on this issue. I came up with some significant ideas, but I'd like to see the idea of Mr. Armenian to have the transfer be a separate line item on that bill. We should know that we pay a 7% utility users tax and that another 11% that it composes the transfer that basically goes to the electric utility, from the electric utility to the general fund. I would also like to recommend that on a monthly basis you get a summary of the capital requirements by both utilities. This is the ADM report. This report was prepared in October of 2007. It gives a summary of all of the requirements that the utility absolutely needed to have. For example, water mains, 144 million. Reservoirs, 29 million. Security improvement, 3 million. Recycling water, 6. It's succinct. It is clear. And yet, what happened after this document was prepared, 6 months after, the city went to a bond agency and basically went into something completely different that did not address this. They went to the smart meter system. That was not in this report. So having clear reports on capital improvement needs for the electric utility, having them for the water utility, will allow you to create the type of analysis and give a warning to the City Council with regard to the financial state of this utility. I would encourage you to demand that of the city staff and have clear reports that we can all understand. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next agenda item.
5A, Commissioner terms and appointments.
President Armenian and members of the Commission, I'm Christine Godinez, Senior Assistant City Attorney. At our last Commission meeting, there was a request for some clarification regarding what's going to happen as a result of the April 2nd election. So I'm here to give you a brief report on that. So, as you may recall, back in 2009, the process of appointing commissioners changed from what it had been previously. At that time, the term of commissioners' terms changed from 3 years to 4 years, and the terms of commissioners were to be coterminous with the council member that appointed them. Previously, commissioners were appointed at large by the council, but with this change, commissioners were appointed by specific council members, and then your terms run coterminous with the council member that appointed you in particular. Okay, next slide, please. So how many terms can you serve? You can serve a total of 2 4-year terms. There are a couple caveats to that, one of which is that at the time this change went into effect, all of the commissioners' terms were rescinded, effective with this new ordinance, and each council member reappointed their commissioners or nominated a new commissioner, as the case may be. And so some of you were appointed in 2009. Anyone who was appointed as part of that new process in October or November of 2009, that initial term that you were nominated and appointed for does not count towards your 2 4-year terms. Additionally, you may serve more than, go back to that slide, there's more terms possible if there's no available candidates and the council makes a finding in that regard, then someone can serve more than the 2 terms. So those are the 2 exceptions to that.
I have ask a question about the last item.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean one council member gets deemed that is the best interest of the city to reappoint, or does whole full city council have to vote on that appointment?
That would be the whole council, yeah. So it would be a
Determine that
finding
there's-
by the city council as a body.
As the body, right, to determine
Right.
that there's no other best qualified candidate.
So when does your term end? Well, so what's going to happen when we wake up on April 3rd after the elections? Really nothing. You're all going to still be in office because you would stay as a member of this commission for 4 years or until your successor is appointed and qualified. So regardless of the outcome of the election, I would expect to see all of you back at the May commission meeting.
That's at your house, right?
And I'm going to pause here on this slide because I do unfortunately have an error in my slides. And so I'm going to go through verbally the effect on the particular commissioners. I do apologize for that, and I will update these slides that are online so that we don't have any misunderstanding. So I'm going to start with Commissioner Yao because he's actually the easiest. You were nominated by Councilmember Weaver. And you were nominated, well, you've been serving since 2007. You're actually our longest-serving commissioner. We thank you for your service. You were nominated as part of this new process in 2009 by Councilmember Weaver. His term was up in 2011. So you had a shorter, a 2-year term that didn't count towards your 2 4-year term limits. So you were then re-nominated, re-serving starting in 2011, and that term will be up in 2015 as well as Councilmember Weaver's term, so it's coterminous with his. So there will be no effect, no immediate effect on you as a result of the upcoming elections next month. And after 2015, you're eligible for one more 4-year term.
Instead of the 2-year term that's on the slide.
Exactly. That was the error. Okay, and then for Commissioner Ajemian, you were nominated by Councilmember Quintero in 2009, and so you're currently serving your first term, which will expire next month. And so, again, that term, because it was that October-November 2009 term, it doesn't count towards your term limit. So you do get 2 additional 4-year terms. However, because Councilmember Quintero is not seeking re-election, you would need to be renominated by another council member once this whole process shakes out after the elections. Okay, so Commissioners Armenian and Chan, you were both appointed in 2009 as part of that October-November new process, and you're both currently serving your first term. So Commissioner Armenian, you were appointed by Mr. Najarian, and Commissioner Chan by Councilmember Friedman, both of whom are running for office. So your current term is going to expire next month, but you are both eligible for 2 more 4-year terms after this. Commissioner Dentler, you were appointed in 2011, and your current term will expire, like Commissioner Yao's, in 2015. However, as you know, you were appointed by Councilmember Manukian, who's running for the office of City Treasurer. We don't know what's going to happen with that. There's Measure A on the ballot. There's his bid to be the new treasurer. So depending on the outcome of that, that may or may not affect what happens after the result of the election for you. But you are eligible for 1 more term because you're currently serving your first of 2 4-year terms. So if we could go to slide 9.
I have one quick question about,
yes.
about my term, though. Just hypothetically, if Mr. Manukian becomes treasurer, when does he become treasurer? Is it the day after the election, or when does he leave City Council?
It really depends because, okay, so we have Measure A on the ballot. So if Measure A, if he wins for treasurer and if Measure A doesn't pass, then my understanding is that all the new council members at least, and I would assume also the treasurer, they're going to be seated for office, I believe, on the 15th of the month. So probably not the immediately following meeting, but the one after that. And so that's when I guess he would take office.
Okay. Thanks. And then, am I in the same category as Mr. Ajemian, where if Councilman Manukian leaves the City Council, some other City Council member could nominate me? Because my term is coterminous with Mr. Manukian's.
Right, but again, as we said, you stay in office until someone else or yourself is renominated or reappointed.
Right,
So
okay.
you'd stay in place, essentially, in the short
I know
term.
you want us to show up in May.
Please.
I'm hearing that.
And possibly June. I
I'll
don't
be-
know how long it's going to take for this
I
to
understand.
all,
I understand.
this process to unfold.
I also had one question for me and Commissioner Chan. You say we're currently serving our first terms, but then you say eligible for 2 additional 4-year terms. How's
It's
that working out?
confusing, yeah. See, so you're currently, you are serving a term right now, but it's the term that began in 2009. And per the ordinance, that term is an extra bonus term. It doesn't count towards your 2 terms.
Got it.
And in fact, there's a website, if you go to the city clerk's website and you go under commissions, there's a chart that shows, what term you're on, how many you have left, and it's very confusing because of this weird rule with the 2009 terms.
Well, that's why that website should show Commissioner Dendler and myself as first term rather than I'm not sure if it's been changed, but that's what our term should indicate because we were nominated in 2011 after that election, so we should have 1 and 1.
Well, but you're in a slightly different position because you started serving in 2009.
For the official term, the first 4-year term, she and I should be the first term in our first 4-year term.
And that's accurate. You're both serving your first of the 4-year terms. So the bottom line, if the council member does not continue as a council member, for those of you that were nominated by someone who's up for election, then you'd need to be nominated by a new council member. If the council member does continue as a council member, whether through re-election or otherwise, the commissioner does not need to be renominated.
But it is at that councilman's discretion, councilperson's discretion, whether or not they continue with that same commissioner, right? In other words, if they take no action, it stays as is, but they have the prerogative to swap someone out if they wanted to.
Yes. Okay, so the next steps. So our next commission meeting is the day before the election, so we would hope to see all of you here for that. Then the elections will take place on April 2nd. As I said, you continue until we have someone new. So April 15th, as I said, that's the expected date by which we would have the new mayor and the council seated. And so the city clerk's office has informed me that on April 16th, that's when they intend to begin the new process of any new nominations of any new commissioners. And the city clerk's office has also told me that you don't need to necessarily submit any new application or formal process. Of course, you may want to contact any council member and express your interest. And so that will all kick off on April 16th. And the way it worked last time, and as I would anticipate it would work this time, is the council members have one meeting where they nominate, and then it goes back, I believe, the next meeting for the full council to vote on it. So it probably will take a couple of weeks for the whole process to play itself out. So by the May 6th commission meeting, I would think that we would still all be here, possibly even June. I don't know how long it's going to take, but that's what I anticipate as the process. With that, if you have any further questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Questions?
Yeah, just so since we changed the process for reappointments and council member elections, the elections for this body, for chair and vice chair, potentially maybe should be recommended to be coinciding with that type of schedule. Should we decide now to determine when we have chair and vice chair elections for this commission at this point?
It would make sense. I mean, as far as in this agenda, I would say let's talk about it under the agenda forecast. But in the past, we've always done it in the February-March timeframe. It makes a little bit more sense to wait until after the elections, particularly this year, since there are so many council members running for office. But that's entirely up to this commission, what you want to do.
So should we talk about it under agenda forecast?
Sure.
Okay, next agenda item.
6, agenda forecast.
Before we get, old business. I had old
Oh,
business.
sorry. Yeah, no,
I wish we had a place on our agenda that other boards and commissions have that says comments by commissioners, so that in the event anybody has a comment about something, bring something forward. And with that in mind, I promise I'll be really fast, but you weren't here, but a couple of meetings ago, I promised to bring a really extraordinary article, and I brought enough for staff and I think my fellow commissioners, and so I'm going to pass it around. It might not go around, but I'll email you yours. Okay. So you can keep it. And this is the piece in the New Yorker, and it is a copyrighted piece, so I couldn't post it or send it around online. But I did tell the New Yorker that I was passing it out to the Glendale Water and Power Commission. And this is an article that came out after the devastating hurricane in Superstorm Sandy, and it talks about how building in resiliency in our water and power systems is so important in planning for the inevitability of floods and hurricanes that come with climate change. And it particularly calls out to reference the importance of the smart grid technology. So I wanted to share that with everyone. Thank you.
Okay, now, item
Agenda
6,
forecast.
agenda forecast.
6, agenda forecast.
So there's two things that I would just throw out there for discussion. One was the issue of the electrical rate issue that we don't have on here. I know it was postponed by City Council to pass the elections, right? And then that kind of loops into the feed-in tariff issue as well, potentially.
And once we have schedules on those, we will tie them into this. We do not have schedules on that process, specific schedules.
Okay,
as
so
of yet.
would you be waiting when new City Council direction in terms of when they want to take it up, or do you have an idea?
We'd want to run by what our proposed schedule is with them, yes.
Okay.
So I would imagine that next month, at our next, well, it probably won't be till our May meeting, that we can give you a defined schedule and then already have plugged in.
So should we put that as an agenda item, just that you will discuss potential schedule?
That's fine.
Want to just have something as a placeholder?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So we'll call that, do you guys agree? Sorry.
Yeah,
didn't
I
go for a
agree.
second.
May,
Okay.
May seems light. What month were you thinking?
May.
May, yeah.
I think that's when you said, Mr. Zern, right?
I did,
May?
yes.
Okay. So we'll, so if we have a
I'll second that.
So Commissioner Chan seconds it. We'll call it potential schedule for electrical, what do you want to call it, rate?
Revenue enhancement program.
Spin.
Like it.
The potential schedule for revenue enhancement.
Now, I want to, Mr. Armenian, point out one thing. We've got the budget under April 1st and the budget on May 6th.
Yeah, I think you weren't here last time.
Right.
Our logic behind that was we wanted to reserve time. We were kind of working our way backwards in terms of allowing enough time for input from commission to meet the city's budgeting schedule.
Good, that's why I brought it up, because the 1st might be too soon and the 6th might be May 6th might be too long. So keep in mind, as we haven't even finished the budget yet, we may need to have a meeting in between, a special meeting in between, and we dedicate it to just the budget presentation, because I want to make sure we get it to you ahead of the council. So the 1st will be a little bit early, and I just want to make sure on the 6th that we're not already all done with our presentation.
Okay.
Do you want to try to pick a tentative date while we're here, or
I should have a pretty good idea on our presentation schedule, although it's somewhat fluid at times. But once I get that, I'll send you all an email and just.
Okay.
And
But we'll leave
my inkling is to say split the difference and do it 2 weeks after, the end of more towards the 3rd week of April. But let me go back and.
But you're okay with us just leaving it on there, just so we have a.
I'd leave them here, yes, because it may turn out that May 6th works just fine.
Okay.
And that's a fairly light agenda. I think the talking about the schedule shouldn't take very long. I'm a little possible impacts on deferred projects update. That's something that we covered when we talked about the budget for this particular fiscal year, and there's really been no change on that. Actually, it's improved because we were able to get the revenue bond for water, so that's improved greatly, and we don't have any real impacts on the electric side yet. Now, if we don't get some of the revenue enhancements we need, and the budget for next year is going to look a little different than we had hoped, then we can talk more about definite potential impacts. So that way we could keep that meeting, if it works out for the budget, mostly about the budget.
Are there any impacts we need to be considering depending on which way the Measure B goes on April 2nd? Or does that really, we just keep going as business as usual?
We'll fold that into the budget discussion, I would think.
Okay. Any other items that other commissioners want to bring up?
Elections.
Elections for this commission?
Yeah.
Did you want to do it next? For sure. We might not
Well,
have
we
it
should
this-
certainly do it by May. We'll know what the fate of all of our elections.
But do you want to have the potentially new commission members, or the current commission members decide the next chair and vice chair?
Well, we won't have any new commission members by May 6th.
Right, that's what I'm saying. If you want to wait further out for potentially new commissioners, or just assume that we'll continue as is.
Well, we could put it, how about this proposal? I see your point. Why don't we put it on our May 6th agenda so that we have some certainty by May 6th about who our officers are? But isn't it possible that we can defer that?
Yes.
So we can just decide not to hold elections if we are awaiting some new members, right?
That makes sense.
How's that?
So
put it on for our May
proposal and
6th.
Commissioner Chan, Commissioner Yao seconds.
Okay.
So we'll just put an agenda item, say determine commission officer elections.
Can I also make a suggestion on the June Energy Quality Risk Management Update? We mentioned it during this session. Can we include the detail that we want a P&L graph so we can look at the profit and loss of the hedging plan?
We're going to try to make sure you have all of that. So,
Maybe we can
and my only caveat to that is bear with us. We'll come to you with quite a bit more information than you've received in the past, and if we need to add other things to it, we certainly can do that. But that would be the intent, was we have the variety of reports that Mr. Campbell referred to.
Yeah, definitely. So then if we have any advice on how to filter that down even further, then the discussion.
Two ideas I'll throw out there. One has to do with what we discussed today, which is we don't have future legislative updates on any of these.
Yeah, let me go back and talk to the staff, and then I'll plug those in. But keeping in mind that we will have some regular, whether we do it
I think
bi-monthly,
periodic,
or quarterly, or monthly. But I'll plug something in there, and maybe we. Maybe we have something in June, just as a placeholder if we decide.
Yeah, let's do that. Do I have a second on that?
I'll second.
So we'll just call it legislative update. Let's at least get that one in, but maybe if you could look at moving forward, Mr. Zern, that would be great. And then the other thing that we don't have, I guess, our next... No, sorry, I just got lost in the terms. So our next update next month will be the utility modernization update. Will be the update on the smart grid, smart meter, all that stuff. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Anything else?
Well, I was going to report back to you on the scope of your duties with respect to legislation. So I can do that at the next meeting.
Next meeting? Okay. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn?
Second?
Second.
All right. Everyone in favor?
Aye.
All right, so moved. Thank you.